It's draft day in the NHL. Sheldon Keefe officially returning to Toronto. The Leafs really interested in trading for a Norris caliber defenseman. All that more coming up on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of your Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Network. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Busy show today, Dave. It's a busy time in the NHL. You've got the NHL Draft tonight, finally. Things will kick off, which means there's going to be a lot more movement. We saw a bunch of trades go down in the last week or so. I expect plenty more to kind of happen today. The Leafs may have their eye on a certain Norris caliber defenseman. We'll talk about that in just a few moments. But I think the biggest news of the day from the Toronto Maple Leafs today is the fact that Sheldon Keefe is officially returning as the head coach of the Maple Leafs for the 2023-2024 season. Brad Treliving spoke with the media today in Nashville, talked about a couple of different things, but I would say that was certainly the most notable news from our side of things. An extension expected to be announced later on in the summer here. First and foremost, your thoughts, Dave.
No, we were just waiting for that note to happen, right? Like, we knew he was coming back. I didn't expect an extension to happen already because it's a little. I think Brad has a little more pressing things on his mind right now, and that's something that can happen. Like, Sheldon Keefe's already got a contract for next year. It's not no. It'd be a little premature to already have the contract already ironed out, I would say. So, it's not surprising, and we mentioned it many times that the benefit of not firing Sheldon Keefe right now, Brad Treliving can play that card during the season when he feels like if there's a shakeup that is needed with this team, he's got that in his pocket. If he does it now, then you take some of that attention from the coaching staff, now goes squarely on him and the decision that he is making.
Yeah, and should point out that Chris Johnson was reporting on this as well, said that apparently those two had spent upwards of 17 hours together, kind of just talking, getting to know each other, looking at video, and trying to decide, do they think they can form a partnership going forward? And, we talked a lot about this when he first took the job, Brad Treliving, that is, and he touched on the fact that he was in a very similar situation in Calgary, and he decided to keep the coach that he was given when he got there, and he went on to win Coach of the Year that season. So potentially, we could have some similar things happening here with Toronto potentially. But sounds as though, it was made official now today that Sheldon Keefe will be returning as the head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I also wonder, how important it was to get that answer, not only for the Maple Leafs, for Brad Treliving, for Sheldon Keefe, but also like for guys like William Nylander and Auston Matthews. Like, if they're going to sign long-term deals here, don't they want to know, okay, well, what's the situation with the coach? Are we having someone else, a new guy come in, or is it going to be Sheldon Keefe, someone who we know, who we respect, and, has had a lot of good things to say about Sheldon. So, I think this is good for, a lot of different people in the organization to just finally come to that conclusion officially so they can get to some other things that are more pressing on the docket, I would say, which leads me to a couple of other things that were discussed within Brad Treliving's media availability today. Didn't divulge much on the Nylander and Matthews situation. He did come out and say that, their priority is to get both of them signed. I wouldn't have expected him to say anything else. But there were reports, there were reports by Pierre LeBrun in The Athletic today that Treliving met with Louis Gross in Nashville. So they've met recently and are still trying to bridge together some sort of agreements or come close to some sort of number that works for both parties, trying to get some clarity as to what it would cost to retain Nylander. Because if not, there's a chance that he could be traded this weekend as well.
Yeah, and like you're gonna make every attempt to make sure you've got, like, I know Treliving said today in the press conference that he's not in any rush to get a deal. He's not saying if it's not done by July 1, we're moving on. But at the same time, he did say that the sooner they can get this done, the more clarity they have on other things going forward. So
Right.
it's good that they're doing the talks and things like that. I'm just curious to know how much is Treliving going to be willing to go with the back and forth, right? With Louis Gross, with William Nylander to get this deal done. It all, by all accounts, he wants him back, but he also said there's no assurances in this business that everyone comes back.
Yep.
He's not putting, what he's trying to do, I think, is just he doesn't want to pin himself into a corner to say we want Willie back and we'll do whatever it takes to have him back. Like there's got to be some sense involved with these negotiations.
Yeah, he's not putting his foot down and saying we can and we will sign everybody and we can and we will win with this core and win with this group, right? Like those are the type of things that were said by Kyle Dubas when he was here in Toronto. A little bit more vague coming from Brad Treliving. I think that's probably on purpose because, again, yes, he would like to bring back all of these players. They are really good players. Nylander's coming off of a 40-goal season and was one of the better players throughout the postseason and has been for many years. Matthews just 1 year removed from being the best player in the league MVP, the Hart, won a whole bunch of awards. So yeah, of course he wants to bring these guys back, but at what cost? Because it has to still make sense for the Maple Leafs. The belief, though, is, Nylander, they'll see where that goes. There's a little bit more question marks on that one. But are you getting the sense, just based on the reporting that you're hearing from pretty much every insider, that it's a foregone conclusion that Matthews will, in fact, end up signing an extension? Might not be on July 1st, but he will definitely be signing an extension here in Toronto. Just seems as though it's unclear as to what the term in AAV would be, but that it's pretty much a 99% likelihood that he does sign an extension, and there's no worry from anyone within the organization that he plans on going to free agency.
Yeah, I think any concern that this deal doesn't happen, I think would be a little misguided to say. The only way this happens is if there's some serious breakdown in talks, and like that does happen. We've seen it happen, but it just seems like the Leafs just don't want this to, again, they don't want this to drag out. And I think Frank Sarvalli was on 590 and said like Matthews isn't going to be trying to, set huge bars for this next contract. He also recognizes that there's a desire to add, right, and make sure the team can build around him too. So it probably means that he won't get the 8 years potentially. Who knows? Maybe that's one way the Leafs can try to get it done, to make sure that they've give him a decent amount, is that you give us the 8 years. I don't know, but I think the idea that he's just going to try to set this huge new bar, I don't just from what I've been hearing the last few weeks, it doesn't seem like that's what Matthews' priority is.
No, so I don't think that we'll get 8 years out of Matthews. I think somewhere in the 3 to 5 year range is probably what we'll see from Auston Matthews. If he does sign $8 million or for 8 years, I think that would be fantastic, obviously, for him to lock himself into Toronto for the bulk of his career and certainly throughout his entire prime. But it doesn't sound like that's going to happen. I think a short to midterm deal makes more sense for him, obviously. And if that's the case, then should leave a little bit of money on the table, in the realm of 13 to 13.5 million, I would think, is kind of where maybe that sweet spot is. 3 to 5 years between 13 and 13.5. If you could get a contract in that realm, I think that works for both parties and everybody goes home happy. Matthews makes a boatload of money. He resets the market and he still has an opportunity to cash in again 3 to 5 years from now when the cap goes up. And the Maple Leafs, they get Auston Matthews for the next 3 to 5 years at a very reasonable cap hit that I would say, considering what he can do for this team moving forward. And keep in mind, this doesn't go into effect until 2 years from now. So that's essentially, even if it's only a 3-year deal, that's 4 more years of Auston Matthews. Basically takes him until he's 29 years old. So, that extends the window for the Maple Leafs if they can make it happen. And it sounds as though it's the expectation is a extension will be signed at some point. Just unclear what that contract will look like officially. All right, we've got a couple more things that we got to talk about today. Just some more news and notes from Leafland, including Brad Treliving and his standing at the draft table. As you guys may remember, he was told when he took the job in Toronto that he was not able to participate in the draft on the draft floor. There's an update on that. We'll tell you in a moment. And sounds like the Leafs targeting a Norris defenseman. We'll tell you who that is in a moment as well, and talk about some of the other league-wide trades that went around the league yesterday and the day before. It's been a wild time, and we expect more moves to happen throughout the day as we inch closer to the draft and even on the draft floor. And Dave and I are going to guess the top 5 draft order. So we're kind of doing a top 5 mock draft, if you will, for tonight's NHL draft. So a lot more to come on today's show, so you don't want to go anywhere. But before we continue, I got to tell you guys about one of today's show sponsors. It's our good friends over at FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-unders, who you think's going to get the first home run of the ball game, all on the app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official partner of the Locked On Network. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. We got a busy one today, obviously, with the NHL draft going down. There's a lot of movement around the NHL, some big trades that went down in the last 24 hours, and some rumored stuff that could be on the horizon in the next 24 hours. So we'll talk on all of those, kind of the rumor mill and what's gone down transaction-wise in the NHL. And we still got our mock draft that we have to do as well, the top 5 players in this year's draft. We're going to mock them. And I tell you what, Dave, I do have a trade in my mock draft. I'm not going to tell you who or what, so you'll have to stay tuned to the show a little bit later on to hear exactly what I am talking about. Just before we took a break, we were telling you about an update from Brad Treliving in regards to his status with the Maple Leafs at the draft table. A resolution has been found. So for those who forget or don't recall or were unaware of the stipulation when Brad Treliving interviewed with Toronto, was that he would not be able to take part in the Maple Leafs draft this year because he was part of the draft process in Calgary. Cooler heads have prevailed since, and it sounds as though they've come to a resolution. So Brad Treliving will be able to join the Maple Leafs at their draft table, but not until after the Calgary Flames make their first round selection at 16th overall. So it sounds like Brad Treliving will be able to get down on the floor, make some deals happen, and potentially have some influence in what happens in that first round pick when they select at number 28. So that's good news, Dave. That is good news that Treliving will be present and active down on the draft floor.
Yeah, because you wouldn't want the Leafs to prosper in any way, right? Because he'd be such a threat with the Leafs. Leafs pick 12 picks after Calgary's pick. Like I can't wait for that moment. Like just like for a fact that as soon as that pick is made, all the cameras are going to be on Treliving coming from somewhere. Be nice if they could do a WWE style entrance.
Well, Stone Cold music hits, and you just hear Jim Ross or whoever's doing the announcing, by God, That's Brad Treliving's music. And he's just running down from like the top row of Nashville from Bridgestone Arena. He's just racing down. Yeah, that'd be hilarious. Or he comes down Shawn Michaels style, potentially down, drops onto the draft floor like on a hanger. Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
hilarious. Could you imagine? That'd be funny. But yeah, so that's a good sign that Brad Treliving will be able to take part in the Maple Leafs draft. I'm curious, Dave. Yesterday we kind of talked about a number of players. If you missed yesterday's podcast, we did go a little into detail into some of the guys we believe should be Leafs targets when they pick at number 28. That's if they stick and pick. Are you going to make a guesstimate as give me one player? Make a guess. Who's it going to be? Who do you think it will be at pick 28 for the Maple Leafs tonight?
Well, just after doing hearing a lot of what people who follow the draft a lot closer than probably I do, Quinn Musty sounds like the guy to me. Like he just screams a Leafs pick, what exactly the type of player they need. So if he's available, I would lean towards his name being available there.
Yeah, he would be if he's there. That's my only question is I'm curious if he'll still be there when the Maple Leafs pick at 28th overall. Like he's a very talented prospect. He was ranked as high as the 11th best prospect by Dauber, and he was I think 20th overall in the consolidated rankings, but ranked as low as the 36th best prospect by one of the prospects ranking people. I forgot who the person was or the company, but so we'll see if he can last to them at 28. But certainly that should be a guy where they kind of run up and turn the card in right away. If Quentin Musty is there for them at 28, I'll give you one other guy. If you're taking Quentin Musty, I'll make a prediction that somebody else ends up being their guy, and I'm gonna go with Riley Haight. I think Riley Haight could be someone who they wouldn't mind bringing into the equation. I mean, he's a little tiny bit undersized, but he's a scrappy player from Prince George, played out in the Dub, versatile, hard nosed. But we talked about what the Elise prospects had to say with him yesterday, and they legitimately started out his draft profile as nasty physically, despite his 5'11" frame. Also has the handling, shooting, and vision to inflict major damage on opponents, takes that extra stride to play the body and never passes up an opportunity to sneak in a shot behind the play, and is an enthusiastic combatant in scrums. The Maple Leafs could use a guy like that. Like, I know he's a little undersized at 5'10", but he's stout at 180 pounds, could still put on a little bit of weight. But I think that Riley Haight at 28th overall might be a good pick, and they could use just a little. They could use some centerman, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think if those two players are available, I think the Maple Leafs will be in good shape. If you want to hear some of the other names that we bandied about yesterday, you can go check out yesterday's podcast where we went into more detail as to some of the names that we think the Leafs should be targeting. Ethan Gauthier, Gavin Brindley, we talked about, Oliver Bonk, a couple other guys as well that are going to be in and around that range. So we'll see where the Leafs end up picking when they are on the clock. If they decide to stick and pick, a trade is also very much in the cards. And speaking of trades, Dave, the Maple Leafs have, would you consider linked a strong word here when we're referring to the interest level of one Erik Karlsson with Toronto? Is linked a strong term, or is it more of is it kicking tires? Is there serious interest? Like, from what you're reading from a whole bunch of different insiders, like, how would you gauge the interest level with the Maple Leafs in Erik Karlsson?
I wouldn't put it overly high, and for a couple of reasons. Like, I think this is Brad Treliving doing his diligence to say, all right, this guy's out there. What would it? His name is certainly out there. We already know it. What would it cost, right? And not only what would it cost to acquire him, how much are the San Jose Sharks willing to eat in salary? Because that is something that, even general manager Mike Greer said that if they do trade, he understands that there's going to have to be a little bit of give and take, right? If the Sharks want to maximize return, they got to get They're going to have to find it to make it easy for whatever team's acquiring to make it work. Although they're not going to just sit here and say, we're going to take half the contract. He already said that's not going to happen either. So, I mean, I'm not going to say it's impossible to expect the Leafs to go after Karlsson. I just wonder, like you look at the other teams that could potentially be involved, they'll pony up, I think, a lot more than what I think the Leafs would offer for an Erik Karlsson.
Well,
Guys is coming off a 100-point season. He's not going to go for pennies on the dollar like we've been seeing in these other trades.
Yeah, I don't think that it'll be, a Taylor Hall deal where it's literally a cap dump in a way for a former MVP. This guy's the reigning Norris winner. He's, multi-time Norris winner. Whatever you want to say about his defensive game, the guy had 101 points, 102, 3, 4 points, something like that. Certainly he crept over the 100 mark this year, and boy, would he be a welcomed addition to this Toronto Maple Leaf squad. The $11.5 million is obviously not feasible. We all know that, so surely there will be some retention involved, but could they possibly get another team involved and get a double retention to get that number down even more? Like, is that possible? Perhaps. What would they have to pay to do it? That is, those are the questions that I guess you would have. And if you're Brad Treliving, you'd have to, kind of decide, okay, is it worth it? Is Erik Karlsson going to transform our team enough where that would make sense for a big move of the offseason of the summer? His first move as the GM of the Maple Leafs is to acquire Erik Karlsson, who, again, massive bounce back season with 101 points. But, the 3-4 seasons prior to that, kind of injuries played a factor, and wasn't able to play a whole lot, was limited to 50 games the season before, 52, 56, 53. I mean, it'd been a while since he had put in an 82 game campaign like he did this year. You have to go all the way back to 2015-16. That was Connor McDavid's rookie year. So ever since Matthews came into the NHL and stripped the puck off of him in that first game that season, he's never played a full 82 game season until this year. So there's a lot to kind of think on when it comes to Erik Karlsson. And was that his resurgence? Was that the return of Erik Karlsson? Or was that just kind of, 1 year, got back on track, and then now at the age of, what is he now, 33? I believe he is. Yeah, 33 years old. How do you really want to bring, that into the fold? How much are you going to pay for it? And are you willing to give up those type of assets? We'll see. He does have a no movement clause, though. So, there may be other teams that want to pony up more assets to trade for him. Like Carolina was a team that apparently is rumored to be kicking tires. Seattle as well. But if you're Erik Karlsson, you have to decide Seattle, Carolina, or the Toronto Maple Leafs. Maybe he'd rather come to Toronto, come back to Ottawa, and gives them a better opportunity to win a cup with Auston Matthews and company, and also gives them a chance to beat down on Ottawa 6 times a year, his old team. So I don't know. I'd be curious to see how that goes. But if the Leafs are serious about bringing in Erik Karlsson at a retained rate, that'd be quite the move for the Maple Leafs to bolster the blue line.
And we see, when you have that dynamic blue liner, it can make a difference in the playoffs, especially.
100%. 100%. And he previously was, when they made that run with Ottawa in 2017, not quite the same player, although he got back to that this year. He's shown how dynamic he can be by himself. You put him with Mitch Marner and, Nylander and Matthews and this whole team, man, imagine what he could do with a whole bunch of more guys who could finish. I'd be curious to see how that kind of works out. Really quickly, there are a few other trades that went down around the NHL in the last 24 hours. Let's quickly recap those before we move on to our mock draft, which we'll be doing in a few moments. So a couple of quick deals. Chicago getting Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno in exchange for Ian Mitchell and Alec Regula. So basically just a pure cap dump at this point. Foligno signed a 1-year extension also with the team. This is I think, a really good move for Chicago, though, to get Connor Bedard, a couple of veterans in Taylor Hall and especially Nick Foligno, but also a scorer and a playmaker like Taylor Hall, and a finisher and a guy who has done good things in the league. And of course, it makes sense that Taylor Hall once again is going to be on a team with the first overall draft selection.
Yeah, and a team that probably wants another first overall draft selection. So if you want a first overall draft selection, make sure Taylor Hall's on your team. He has a bit of a history with that.
Yeah, exactly. But I thought it was a really shrewd deal. Give Connor Bedard some talent around him because there's not a whole lot there right now. You bring in Taylor Hall to play with him. Now he's got someone to play with. I think that's an interesting move. Tyler Toffoli was another one off to the New Jersey Devils for Yegor Sharangovich and a third-round pick. What'd you make of this trade?
I mean, the Flames seem to really bungle that situation, in my opinion. Like, if it came out that a few weeks ago Toffoli said, I want to be moved because it doesn't seem like you want me to be a part of the future because there was no contract talks happening. Like, initially, him and Treliving had maybe a conversation, but then once Treliving was gone and Craig Conroy took over, it was crickets. So he's just like, all right. It was almost like he was looking for a reason to get out of Calgary too. So I think Calgary was in a tough spot. Like, they just traded their top goal scorer for a third round pick and a guy who's like, yeah, a little younger, but not really going to move the needle in Calgary. So
I like Sharangovich. I'll be honest with you.
yeah,
I don't dislike this trade as much as most people. I like Sharangovich. He had 24, 25 goals this year. He's a pretty young player. I think he's an RFA, so he's got to sign a new contract. And they get a pick out of the deal as well. So they got younger with a guy that's, entering his prime. And if you can get him locked up for a few years, Tyler Toffoli ultimately is also he's a 25 goal scorer himself. Like, I think he scored 30 once in his career. So I would consider, him he's not like any electric top line player. He's a second line winger. And I think Sharangovich can also be a second line winger, and he's younger, and ultimately Toffoli didn't want to be there. So this is again Calgary taking someone who didn't want to be there and making the best out of a bit of a tough situation.
I'll say this about Sharangovich though, because it wasn't this year he had 24 goals, it was the year before that, but his shooting percentage was 14.3%, and it went down to 9.9% this past year. We got 13 goals in 75 games, so a little bit of a streaky scorer. Like, he's gonna.
How many points did he have in this season?
He had 30 points in 75 games. Right.
Yeah.
So, like, they're banking on potential, but he's also 25, right? He's not this 22, 23-year-old.
Yeah.
25 is still relatively a decent age for him because, this is only his third year in the league.
I believe if I remember correctly, though, with New Jersey, because they ended up bringing in some more talent this year, they brought in Andre Palat, they brought in Timo Meier. His numbers ended up getting, he was dropped off the power play, and I believe he was dropped down the lineup also. So the opportunity wasn't quite there this season like it was last year. If he goes to Calgary, maybe a little bit more opportunity, he can get back to being that 20 to 25 goal scorer. And I'm assuming that's what they're hoping for in this trade. Also get another third round pick out of the deal as well.
Yeah, I mean, like,
we'll see.
He got something for Toffoli, that, like, to say the least. And I don't think Toffoli had trade protection, so I don't think he had a lot of savor he went. But I guess the Flames just didn't want this to be something that they wanted to have lingering over for as long as they needed it to be.
Devils also making another trade. They shipped out Mackenzie Blackwood, their goaltender, to the San Jose Sharks for a 6th round pick. So that was, again, just another kind of cap dump of a situation. So Blackwood goes down to San Jose. San Jose, okay, there was a minor league deal. Andrew Agazzino, former Niagara Ice Dog, I might add, goes to the Ducks for Andre Schuster. But two more big trades made today Pierre-Luc Dubois, that finally was put over the finish line. We were right. We said one of Velarde, Turcotte, or Byfield were probably going to be the main piece included in this deal. Gabe Velarde was included in this deal with Dubois going to the Kings. It was for Gabe Velarde, Rasmus Kupari, who was a first-round pick of the Kings a few years ago, and Alex Iafallo, who pretty good player, 20-plus goal scorer as well, and a second-round pick next season, which I believe is the Canadiens draft pick, I think, if I'm reading this correctly. So Iafallo, Kupari, Velarde, and a second-round pick for Pierre-Luc Dubois. So they get 4 pieces, don't get a first rounder, but they do get Kupari and Velarde, 2 young, controllable players, and Iafallo, who I think has 2 years left on his deal at a respectable $4 million cap hit. So, they got, 4 pretty good pieces for Pierre-Luc Dubois, who goes to LA and signs himself a monster deal, 8 years, $8.5 million AAV. Pretty big move there for both parties, I think.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, for LA, they're banking on that monster 1-2-3 punch down the middle to really push them forward. They did give up something significant though. Like this isn't an insignificant deal for Winnipeg. Like they got players that they believe can keep they're not necessarily as many win now type of players. Like Velarde still needs to come into his own a little bit here. I follows a decent player, but I mean, considering
Velarde had a breakout this season though.
Yeah.
Like Velarde, 23 goals, 41 points in 63 games in the regular season, 4 points through 5 playoff games as well. So Velarde started to kind of come into his own. He's 23 years old, 6'2", big right-handed winger, can play center ice as well. We'll see what they end up doing with him. So I think Velarde is a really good return and probably the best player they're able to get. Kupari, Iafallo is probably the most established player. I don't think they made out too bad on this one.
No, I don't.
Moving on from Pierre-Luc Dubois, I think they got some good pieces.
Yeah, and like for LA, like that's a costly contract to do 8.5 because they got a significant commitments when you got Kopitar, Fiala, Doughty. Now you have Dubois. They still need a goaltender sign. Like there's some like LA's got a quite a lengthy list here.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for Winnipeg, they've made the best out of that situation, and I actually think this might work out a little better for them just because Dubois didn't want to be there. They risked losing him for nothing. They got probably the best deal that they could, and Dubois gets to go to a good a situation. Now he's got that long-term commitment that he's been looking for and the money he's been looking for. So I think both parties made it out quite well, and I'm impressed by the Jets a little bit here with this deal.
Yeah, and there was a report that Montreal kind of late to the party tried to see if they could get something once they got caught wind that Dubois was willing to sign long term in LA. They said, "Oh, if we want this guy in Montreal, we might have to spring a trade for him so he doesn't do the sign and trade." But apparently, it sounds like the Jets were trying to get roster players in return, and that's what they got. They got 3 roster players and a second round pick, and like Montreal, they had picks and prospects, but no roster players, so they weren't able to come to an agreement. And he ends up in Los Angeles, and he'll be there for the next 9 years actually, because there's still 1 more year left on this current deal. So 9 more years he's signed through to be a LA King. The one other trade that did go down today, one of some noteworthiness, I guess I could say. And this one also had to do with the Montreal Canadiens. So once they knew that they weren't going to be getting Pierre-Luc Dubois, they did spring for a forward, a former first-round pick, and they ended up getting Alex Newhook from the Colorado Avalanche, and they gave up a first-round pick, a second-round pick, and then they threw in a prospect as well, Gianni Fairbrother. So they gave up the 31st overall pick and the 37th overall pick for Alex Newhook, who was the 16th pick back in 2019. Yeah, so 2019. So he's 22 years old. But Dave, back-to-back years, only 33 points last year, only 30 points this year through 82 games. It seems like a steep price to pay for Alex Newhook, who hasn't quite lived up to the billing of a first-round pick like he was a few years back when he was taken by Colorado.
No, and like with Newhook here too, because there like this was supposed to be a player that was supposed to step up and take a bigger role in Colorado, mainly the second line center behind Nathan McKinnon, and that really didn't materialize. And this led to Colorado saying, "All right, we're going to go get Ryan Johansson instead," right? And so, yeah, it just seems like there was a lot of fanfare with Alex Newhook when because he did pretty well with Boston College. He came, I believe, like during like late in the season, he was signed, I think something like that, and just didn't seem to catch on with the Avs. I don't know if it's because of the role he played. I don't know if it was maybe a little too soon for him. He didn't really play a lot in the AHL. Maybe that was the issue there. Is that transition period wasn't there for him. So, but it's still a really steep price for Montreal to pay, just because, what's Montreal hoping to do? Like, I understand you got these picks and you wanna go and get some NHL ready talent, but you're paying a first and a second for a guy that I guarantee you probably could have gone with that second round pick. If to be honest here, like I feel like
probably not. I mean, I would assume that Montreal offered a second round pick, and it was quickly
and they still have to sign him
with a
too, I
no.
believe.
Yeah,
Like,
I think he is an RFA. Yeah, let me check really quickly. I'm on his cap friendly, so I can check for you. Yeah, so he does have to sign. I don't think it's going to be an expensive contract.
No.
Like, this might be something where they sign him to like a 1 or a 2 year deal at $1.5 million, $2 million or something like that, and just hope that much like Kirby Dach, they did the exact same thing a year ago with Kirby Dach, who a couple years in wasn't really finding his footing with Chicago. They traded a first round pick for him last year. So they try and do the same thing with Newhook this season. But for me, I don't know if I see as high an upside on Newhook as I did on Kirby Dach. I could be wrong. Newhook could turn out to be a terrific pickup for the Montreal Canadiens. But as it stands right now, he hasn't shown to me that he's worthy of a first and second round pick, 31st and 37th overall in this draft, 2 top 40 picks. I think is a hell of a haul for Colorado, who, we saw pick up Ryan Johansson earlier this week and basically said, yeah, Newhook, we could either kick him out to the wing or we could turn him into, picks or prospects or players. And it's exactly what they did. Brilliant asset management from the Colorado Avalanche. And with that, that's it for the trades, I think. So I think we got to all of them. The Kevin Hayes deal officially did go through today as well. So he is en route to the St. Louis Blues for a 6th-round pick. Flyers retaining 50% of Kevin Hayes' salary in the deal. So that's $3.5 million cap hit. He's going to St. Louis, and Flyers keeping getting a 6th-round pick next year in return. So that does it for the trade roundup. Like I said, there's a lot of it. Lots of movement that went down in the last 24 hours. And I guarantee you, Dave, we're going to have a lot more movement throughout the rest of the day and even on the draft floor and throughout the next couple of days. It's silly season. It's so much fun. I love it. The Maple Leafs at some point are going to get involved here. Is it for a guy like Erik Karlsson? Perhaps. I'm not sure. Maybe it's somebody else. Maybe it's Hannafin. Maybe it's Lindholm. Who knows who it could be? But it's going to be a very, very intriguing next few days, couple weeks here in not only Leafland, but all around the NHL. All right, really quickly when we come back, Dave, we got to do our mock draft. Tonight is the NHL Draft. We'll go through our top 5 selections, who we think are going to go in order. I got a trade that is part of my draft as well. So I can't wait to tell you what I have in store for you, and we'll do that on the other side. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti, listening to Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. Locked On Leafs is your spot to hear everything that's going on with the Maple Leafs each and every weekday. You can check us out wherever you get your podcasts from, also up on YouTube as well. We'd ask if you enjoy what you're listening to, please hit subscribe and hit the little notification bell as well, so you can be notified exactly when we drop new videos and new content, because there's a lot going on and there's a lot of news to be caught up on, certainly. So you can do that all here on Locked On Leafs. All right, buddy. Maple Leafs obviously don't have a top 5 pick in this draft because, well, they're actually a good hockey team and they make the playoffs every year. They might not win rounds, but at least they make the playoffs. And they even won a round this year, which is why they pick so late. Also, they have traded their first round pick in, the last like 4 or 5 years as well. But regardless, we're going to mock the top 5 of the 2023 NHL Draft. Why don't you kick us off? Give us your 5 picks, the team and the player 1 through 5. You take the floor, pal.
Yep, let's go Chicago number 1. The schlep that everyone keeps talking about on Connor Bedard.
Whoa! Whoa! Crazy pick! Oh my god!
The worst is going to be when like you're actually going to have to wait for Chicago to make the pick.
Clock?
Yeah, the draft clock. Like if we have to go through that, this is gonna be ridiculous.
Guaranteed. There's gonna be a clock. It's gonna be just ridiculous. But anyways, continue.
Yeah. And so number 2 with the Anaheim Ducks, I'm gonna be going with Adam Fantilli, the consolation prize that might end up being a pretty decent consolation prize, if I do say so myself. So future the next Ryan Getzlaf, I'm going to call him for the Anaheim Ducks. That's a lot of people have been calling him for the last little bit. All right, number 3, we got the Columbus Blue Jackets. And this is where maybe some people have differing opinions, but I'm going with what a lot of people have been mocking, and it's going to be Erik Karlsson.
Oh.
I
thought you were going to do it. Continue.
I just think that he's the better prospect out of all like the remaining guys in that draft. So I know that there's been talks between him and the guy who I'm going to be going with next with my pick.
So just really quickly, you can actually still make wagers on FanDuel on the NHL Draft. So far, you are picking all the favorites to go. So Fantilli minus 700 to go second overall. Erik Karlsson minus 300 to go third overall. So I'm curious to hear who you think goes fourth overall.
I'm going to go with Will Smith. He's a guy that some people think could go third overall. I just think that Karlsson has shown a little more flash to his game. So, I just think that that's likely how it's going to shake out there. San Jose really doesn't have that center prospect in their system. That's right. So I think that makes sense for them. The real intrigue here is at number 5 with Montreal, because we've heard that they could be the team that gets Michkov. I personally don't think so. I do think that they might play it a little bit safer and go with something that Ken Hughes knows, and that's Ryan Leonard.
Leonard.
But there's quite a few options. There's also the defenseman, David Reinbacher. That's a player that a lot of people believe, if the Habs really want to improve the blue line, that's a position they go. But I think Ryan Leonard is the better fit for what I think the Habs will want to do here.
So Ryan Leonard at FanDuel is the favorite to go number 5 as well here. So you went chalk on all the favorites on FanDuel. It's like as if you went to FanDuel and you made your top 5 selections based off of their betting numbers here. But yeah, Ryan Leonard is the top prospect, and you mentioned it. David Reinbacher is the second shortest odds. Michkov, the third shortest. Will Smith comes in. Dvorsky, Zach Benson is a player who potentially could hop in around this range. So that'll be interesting to see what ends up happening and what the Montreal Canadiens do at number 5, given they had 2 first round picks a couple days ago, no longer just 1 first round pick, and they trade away a high second round pick as well. So whoever they take here, they're going to have to hit on them because they don't have, a couple more top 40 picks that they once had no more than 48 hours ago. So
Now I
interesting.
wonder if the new Hook trade makes them reconsider what they do at 5-2
So
because
maybe go Reinbacher and bring in a defenseman.
yeah,
We're
like
thinking.
right, and they picked Slafkovsky last year, so maybe they decide to address the blue line because they really haven't done that with their draft picks. So that's
Not a
the
fan.
only thing.
Not a fan of
Right.
Arbor Jack Guy. Wi-Fi. Forgot
Oh
about
yeah,
Wi-Fi. He'll beat you up in the parking lot for saying that. Come
he
on now.
will, but he's also dealing with he's fighting, but then he's also getting himself injured because he's fighting so much too.
Yeah. So there it is. That's your top 5. You have Bedard, Fantilli, Karlsson, Will Smith, and then are you sticking with Leonard or are you making the swap to Reinbacher?
I'm gonna stick with Leonard.
Okay.
But it wouldn't surprise me if they decide to go in a different direction.
All right. So there's your top 5. That's your guess. That's your mock draft. We're pretty similar. It's chalk 1, 2, 3. I think most people have it set in stone that the Blackhawks are very clearly going to stick and pick generational talent. Connor Bedard, Adam Fantilli will go number 2, we believe, to the Anaheim Ducks. A hell of a player. Won the Hobie Baker Award as a freshman. So he's going to probably get taken number 2 overall. That's where I believe he will go. And Leo Karlsson, I'm with you. I think Leo Karlsson is probably the better prospect. He's a hell of a playmaker, and I think that Columbus is a good spot for him. They need a centerman. They've got a couple of guys on the wings. They could use someone like a Leo Karlsson to come in there at number 3. I mentioned, I've been teasing it throughout the show, that I do have a trade in my top 5. It's not very often we see big trades happen in the top 5, but I do have one. And I have the San Jose Sharks moving out, and I have the Washington Capitals moving all the way up to 4. So from 8 to 4, and they are selecting Matvei Michkov with the 4th overall selection.
Oh.
There's rumblings, Dave, that there's a couple of teams that would be able to get Michkov out of his KHL contract early. And one of those teams, reportedly, is the Washington Capitals. And that's the reason why Michkov even falls to 4. Because if not, I mean, Michkov could be in the conversation at number 2 and 3. I mean, talent alone, he is certainly, the number 2 player, I would say, behind Bedard, I believe. But he does have 3 years left on his KHL deal, which is why he kind of, some teams are going to be a little weary of that, just not going to be able to get him overseas and not be able to get their hands on him for, internal growth and development. They're going to have to rely on whatever he does in the KHL, and that could turn some teams off. That's why we see a lot of Russian players slide down the draft board. Happened to Nikita Kucherov the year that he was taken. And I don't know, if any of those top 3 teams are willing to make that gamble. But Washington is an interesting team because if they move up, they grab this kid. There's a player by the name of Alexander Ovechkin on Washington. You don't think he's got some pull out in Russia to maybe see if he could pull a couple of strings and get this guy out of his contract to get over into the NHL to play with Alex Ovechkin in Washington? I think he might know some people over there who could get some things done.
What would you expect Washington to pay up in a deal like this? Curious.
All right. Now I got to go to their cap friendly, and I need to figure it out. I did have like a framework of what I think it would cost to make something like that happen. Like they pick at 8th overall, so to move up from 8th to 4th, what would it cost them? So I'm just gonna quickly check and see what their situation is in terms of their draft capital, because they might have to give up a couple of picks along the way, but I'm not sure exactly what their pick situation is, because they've been a team that's been buying for many seasons. This year they decided to finally sell off a little bit, obviously, and do a little bit of a rebuild. So they do have their first round picks for the next 3 years. They have their second round pick this year, don't have a third, don't have a second next year, but they have 3 thirds next season. I don't know. You probably are looking for eighth overall. Obviously, maybe even you try and grab another draft pick either in the second round, or you try and get the third round pick, or you could try and get another player. I mean, if you're talking about the San Jose Sharks, they probably want some young guys potentially. Do you entertain putting in a Connor McMichael or a Hendrix Lapierre in one of these trades potentially? Could you maybe do something like that? Give them, one of these younger players? Is there maybe a young roster player that they might be willing to put in a deal here potentially to make something happen? I don't know. Perhaps that's kind of where I was leaning. Could they maybe an Anthony Mantha? Like if they want to move on from Anthony Mantha, maybe he's somebody you could toss into a trade here. And he could go and maybe try and resurrect his career and get a bigger role with the San Jose Sharks, and they get a roster player who could come in and serve as a good NHLer for them. So I think that there's enough pieces that they have, whether it's in their system or a pro like Mantha or a couple of their prospects and picks, that they could certainly put together a package to move up from 8 to 4 and get their guy in Matvei Michkov. So that's like a pipe dream type thing, but man, I think it's possible, and we'll see if Washington can make it happen. Which leads to Montreal's pick here at number 5. And I'm with you where I think Will Smith is a terrific prospect, center prospect. And I think this is where Montreal gets themselves a good two-way centerman here from the national team development program. They get like 100 and something points last year with the national team, 127, I think it was. So he's a really good prospect. So I think Will Smith would be a great selection there at number 5. And that rounds out the top 5 mocks. So I've got Bedard, Fantilli, Bedard going to Chicago, Fantilli going to Anaheim, Leo Carlsson going to Columbus. We've got Washington trading into the number 4 pick to take Ovi's fellow countryman, Matvei Michkov. And then I've got Will Smith going to the Montreal Canadiens at number 5 overall. How you like that one, pal?
Not bad. A little spark, a little juice. Never gonna hate on that, for especially around draft time where it can get a little predictable. So wouldn't hate a little fun to come out.
Dude, silly season, man. Silly season. Let's get silly. Let's get some movement on the draft board. Some players, some moving, some shaking. That's what I love about this time of year. There's so much going on, so much to talk about. Today was a long one. It was a bit of a long podcast, long episode. But listen, there's a lot going on. There's a lot for us to talk about. And obviously with the news of Sheldon Keefe officially returning, there were some updates and some discourse around the contract extensions with Nylander and Matthews. Erik Karlsson's name is being linked to the Maple Leafs, and you've got the draft. You had a bunch of trades around the NHL. There's a lot going on right now in the National Hockey League, and tonight is the NHL Draft, where there'll be even more stuff that will happen, and we'll come and we'll kind of recap things tomorrow night and get you set for day 2 of the draft on Thursday. But that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcast platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti. Follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. Go ahead, smash that like button if you're watching here on YouTube. Comment down below as well. Do you think the Maple Leafs should be interested in Erik Karlsson? Let us know in the comment section below. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow night, or tomorrow morning rather. Enjoy the draft tonight, but until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.